we're talking about small d democracy, right? Democratic process. All of us people that have an interest in and a voice in the decision-making ability. Keep in mind, in Europe, when people began to come over to the Americas, we're still primarily in the midst of the medieval time period. And who's ruling Europe throughout the medieval time period? Nobles, kings, aristocrats, the well-born, right? That's going to change toward the end of the medieval time period. And one of the biggest reasons that it changes, the Enlightenment. Okay? Let's get the definition out of the way first of all. The Enlightenment, guys, it's the rebirth of learning. It's the rebirth of reading. It's the rebirth of thinking. I'm talking about people like Sir Isaac Newton, who developed the core principles of things like calculus. I'm talking about the astronomer Copernicus that made the observation and published it, and toward the end of his life, that it's the earth that revolves around the sun, not the other way around. Right? John Locke is a political Enlightenment thinker, and his claim to fame, we've talked about him before, he believes that government only exists to protect the rights of the people. And in order for government to have any power at all, to legislate, to pass laws, to make decisions, it needs the people's consent. That no law is a legitimate law without the consent of the people. So government derives its power, write it down, from the people. Okay? This is the Enlightenment thoughts. And the Enlightenment, there's other attributes to it as you'll see, but the Enlightenment believes that you can make human lives better, that humanity can be improved through learning, through the concepts that we now call college, university, right? Upper levels of education. Okay? Now, the Enlightenment has an enormous consequence, an enormous impact in the New World, in the American colonies. Primarily, I want you to write this down, primarily because it lays the foundation for American political thought. No taxation without representation. Government gets its power from the people. Those are Enlightenment principles. Okay? Yeah, government gets its power from the people. That is an Enlightenment principle. So America's political thought is founded on Enlightenment principles. People like John Locke. Now, let me divert from that for just a second. Right? The way that most American colonists described and understood the world around them was through folklores, right? Old wives' tales. We've got the example of Cotton Mather, who said that when lightning hits a house, it's a sign of what? God. It's a sign of God intervening directly in human affairs. God's mad at that household because it's a sinful household. Now, the American representative of the Enlightenment, that would be our good friend Benjamin Franklin. Okay? Benjamin Franklin. What do you know about him? Yeah.
He's an educated gentleman that was the fourth founding and scientific development in the United States.
Yeah, he is, let me put it this way. He's an amateur scientist, right? I mean, it's not as if he has a doctorate from Oxford in physics or something like that. But he tinkered, he played around with stuff, he experimented, and he had a vast curiosity. He read like nobody's business, okay? And he was also a rambling kind of a guy. The ladies in here will be able to tell me this. This guy hot? That website hot or not? Is this guy hot or not? Why are you laughing? Other than he's got a skullet. You know what a skullet is? It's a bald guy with a mullet. Right? But the ladies dug him, man. I mean, we sent him over there to Paris as a diplomat to try to help us out with the British. And you know what he did over there? Fathered a child out of wedlock. Right? So he loved the ladies, and the ladies loved him right back. But anyway, Benjamin Franklin, for your notes, is an American representative of the Enlightenment. He's a guy that is explaining the world around him through science, the laws of nature, reason, rationality, right? And nothing strikes at that idea better than this image right here. What's he doing? You see?
The famous kite.
He's flying a kite. It's an experiment. And what's attached to the kite? Yes, a key made out of
Iron.
metal, right? And metal, where's my science people here? What's metal?
The conductor.
Conductor of electricity, right? So electricity is, or excuse me, I said it backwards. Lightning is essentially a big mass of electricity. And so when he flew it up there in the sky, what happened? Lightning conducted it, right? So what Benjamin Franklin's doing in this image is refuting Cotton Mather's notion that God sends lightning to intervene in man's affairs. Yeah?
Benjamin Franklin was a representative of American political thought.
Well, Enlightenment thought, generally speaking. Certainly he's a political thinker, just like Thomas Jefferson is a political thinker. Right? I really don't care how you think about this. I just need you to know that it made a profound impact on the American colonies. Benjamin Franklin's probably the most vivid example, but certainly Thomas Jefferson is too. You got me off track for a little bit, but it's good because I can tell you an interesting story. Thomas Jefferson and Franklin were people that were known as deists. Deism, right? Now, to be a deist meant that you acknowledged that there is a power that's higher than mankind, right? Mother Nature, for instance, is a power that's greater than mankind. Just ask anybody in New Orleans around about 2006, right? They'll tell you that Mother Nature is more powerful. Well, the issue at hand is they acknowledge that there are higher powers, but they're saying it's probably not that old man in the sky understanding that the Puritans have. In other words, it could be the Christian God, it may not be the Christian God. I don't really know. All I know that there are things that are above and beyond our control. Yeah?
So it's more like we believe there is a higher power, but we don't know what it is.
Kind of, yeah. Right? And so what this does is it really flies in the face of the established order, which is Christianity. Right? I mean, not only do deists not exactly pin down the idea that God is that higher power, the Christian God that is, right? They believe in, the idea that human beings are born good, right? And not only are they born good, they can get better. You gotta work at it, but they can get better. Now, what is it that we're all obsessed with, assuming for a second that we're not a Baptist, right? What is it that we're all obsessed with as Christians when a baby's born?
That it is pure when it's born to us.
It's pure?
Get rid of original sin.
Yeah, you got to get rid of original sin, and you do that by baptizing the child, right? I mean, you baptize a child, and it washes away original sin. So in the Christian faith, we're born sinful, right? And in order to get into heaven, you need to wash away that sin, be reborn, however it is that you want to think about it, right? Deism refutes that idea, saying that human beings are born good and can get better with time. It's an Enlightenment principle. Now, the other thing, I heard somebody over here say this. The deists believe in reason, logic, science, that there's a reasonable scientific explanation as to why the world is the way that it is. Obviously, this too flies in the face of Christian doctrine, considering the Puritan Church said, this is the reason that it is the way that it is, and you should never question it. Right? Anybody recognize this guy? Nobody? Close. Thomas Jefferson. Right? Now, Thomas Jefferson was very similar to Benjamin Franklin in the sense that he had an enormous academic interest. I mean, it ran the gamut. Science, industry, international relations, law, obviously politics. And one of his favorite pastimes? Reading the Bible, right? Reading the Bible. And every single time Jefferson would pass across something he didn't believe could be explained through science and reason, he'd take out his pocket knife and he'd cut that section of the Bible out. So by the time that he got to the back cover of the Bible, what did his Bible look like? Swiss cheese, right? There's all Moses parting the Red Sea. Don't believe it, not buying it. It's out of there, right? So deism is posing a very deep and fundamental challenge to the notion of Christianity in American life. Yeah? No, certainly not atheism. I mean, an atheist is a person that believes that there is no God, right? That religion is essentially a man-made institution and therefore, we're essentially a collection of atoms. The deist, I would say agnostic, right? Which is kind of a wimpy way of saying atheist in our day and age. But back during this time period, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, people like him said, it absolutely could be the way that it's written down in the Old Testament, the New Testament for that matter. But I'm not going to sit here and say that that's exactly the way that it is. They believed in science, they believed in reason in terms of explaining the world. Does that help?
But they do believe that there is a higher power.
Exactly. They do believe that there is a higher power, which is really why I would very much hesitate calling them an atheist. Yeah. Anybody else? Emerging at the same time as the deists are doing their thing is another movement that's sweeping across Europe. I mean, the Enlightenment was brought to American shores by immigrants, and so too is this religious movement known as Pietism, right? Pietism. Now, for your notes, what Pietism actually is a new understanding of the Christian religion that emphasizes you do not have to be Pope, you don't have to be bishop, you don't have to be the King of England, you don't have to be a blue-blooded aristocrat to have a relationship with your Creator. You can have your own impression of the Bible, you can make your own interpretation of Christian doctrine, and most importantly, guys, what I want you to write down, you can have your own personal relationship with God, right? That God and you have this direct connection. Now, there are certain faiths within the Christian religion where this is absolutely not the case. And Catholicism would be one of those, right? If you're Catholic, you're going to get this, right? That ideas, concepts, and most importantly, obligations are handed down. They're handed down from whom? The Pope, because the Pope is the representative of God on earth. So when the Pope says things like, I don't like the idea of birth control, right? Every card-carrying Catholic is supposed to follow that blindly. The Puritan Church is similar in that sense. It's got a very tight grip over New England. It says, look, this is the way that it is, and if you get out of line, there will be consequences for it, right? So for your notes, what Puritanism is, write it down. It's a democratic, small d, democratic flair of religion. It's changing the religious orientation of a lot of American colonists. Yeah. Pietism. Yeah, Pietism. Now, Pietism really begins to emerge in central Germany, and then it's brought over to the American colonies by these German immigrants. And one of those German immigrants, that would be Theodor Jacob Frelinghuysen, right? Frelinghuysen is the guy that really plants the seed in American life as it relates to Pietism. But the guy that takes this to the next level, that would be one of the more interesting individuals in all of American religious history, that would be Jonathan Edwards. Edwards was one of these pious preachers, right? And there's a reading in your big green book that you should take a look at. It's very interesting this week. It's called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. If you read that, he makes an analogy. A big hand holding a spider, just a little thread. The spider's thread is being held over an open candle flame, right? What can that hand do to the spider? Any given moment that he wants to. Drop it. He can hold it over the flame and burn the spider alive. He can hold the thread over the flame and the spider would fall from the sky. What is this a metaphor for? God has us holding over a flame by a thread, right? And that flame is a metaphor for? Exactly. Hell is a real place. And if you don't accept Christ into your life, then you could go there. This is a very real possibility. Right? I mean, it's what you would call, in our day and age, it's what you call fire and brimstone. And what it does is it has an absolutely electrifying effect on the people that are going and listening to these sermons. Right? Now, the guy that takes the fire and brimstone approach Edwards' approach and takes it on a series of religious revivals, that would be George Whitefield, right? And these series of religious revivals all across the American colonies, that would be the Great Awakening, right? It's this religious awakening that's really reinventing the institution of Christianity, religion, in American life. Up until this point, you had faiths like the Anglican Church, like the Puritan Church, to a lesser extent the Catholic Church, that were really the brokers of power, right? I mean, you think about the Anglican Church. Who's the head of the Anglican Church? Exactly. Ever since Henry VIII, you've got the King of England that was calling the shots as it related to religion. Now you have this deep challenge to the institution that is religion. Can somebody pull that door shut, please? Anyway, Whitefield goes on this revivalist tour, and over the course of time, it becomes known as the Great Awakening. And what was happening at these religious revivals? Anybody know? Watch the 700 Club every once in a while? Right? People could be possessed by God. God goes back to this idea of directly intervening in human life. You could have this direct connection. God could use you to speak to people, only the people couldn't understand your language. You were speaking in tongues, right? People would pass out. People would do all these other things at these religious revivals that would demonstrate that God was acting through them. Not the king, not the pope, not the bishop, not the wealthy aristocrats, right? It was a small d democratic version of religion. Now, how and why does this relate to American political thought? We're talking about religiosity, right? And I just got done telling you that the Enlightenment principles were the basis of American political thought. What does this have to do with American political thought? Let's talk about this from the North, right? In the North, if you were one of these people that deeply believed in this new religion, you were referred to as a new light. And if you were one of these Puritans that were clinging on to the old ways, you were conservative in that way, you were an old light. And there's going to be a struggle between the new lights and the old lights in places like New England.
So,
now, yeah.
What would the Great Awakening be called? The new lights in terms.
Like churches, you mean? You would call them the Presbyterians, or the Presbyterians rather. Methodists, a good example. The best example, Baptists, right? That's the absolute best example, and you'll see why toward the end of the class, right? Now, let's dig back into this. Francisco's actually onto a really good point here. One of the things that the Great Awakening is inspiring are these separatist churches, right? These separatist churches. But, of course, the Puritan church would dismiss these guys as, oh, they're just a bunch of religious hotheads, they're crazy. We're still the name brand household name within religiosity. Well, what do you do if you want to present yourself as a community of ideas, as a community of thinkers? Where do you go? You go to a place where you study this stuff, right? You go to these religious learning centers. Okay, I bet you've heard of some of these religious learning centers. Right? Queens College. That would be in Princeton, New Jersey, but you don't call it Queens College anymore, you call it Princeton University. Right? Anybody ever been to Harvard University, one of the oldest colleges in America? Harvard University was, there are three great myths that you'll learn about Harvard University. You come to Boston with us, right? One, John Harvard, the guy that's on the statue there, the quote-unquote founder of Harvard, they never founded Harvard University. Harvard, the college fathers, just got a guy that looked like he lived in the 16-whatever, and they put him up there right in front of the central part of campus, and that's everybody acknowledges John Harvard as the founder of Harvard University. But Harvard was founded as a religious learning center, the same way that Oxford University in England was started as a cathedral school. That's where you went if you wanted to be a priest, because you had to learn how to speak Latin. And the only place that would teach you how to do that was Oxford Cathedral School. Harvard's very similar. But over the course of time, what happens at Harvard? it becomes very prestigious. That is the institution that you want to send your kids to. But they start adding other disciplines. They start thinking outside of this pure religion box. And so to keep them back on track, there's another religious center that's founded in New Haven, Connecticut.
Yale.
Exactly. Yale University is founded as a direct response to Harvard University because they think Harvard has lost their way. And obviously over the course of time, especially in the 1860s with the development of, what's on TV tomorrow? Football. With the development of football, what you get is this intense rivalry. Right? I mean, later on, in the later part of the 19th century, when you see the rise of the University of Chicago, right, one of the things that they do is they raid Harvard and Yale's professors, and they also hire their football coach, right? Because in order to be a college university, you have to have a good football team. But anyway, what I want you to understand about this Great Awakening in the North, it loosens the grip of Puritan control, right? The Puritans had firmly been in control. Now that you've got all these religious learning centers and these new separatist churches, that's not the case anymore, yeah.
So how can you define the Great Awakening? A religious...
Really what I want you to understand about it is a series of religious awakening revivals, right? That more and more people are going to these revivals, and this is the mechanism, the vehicle, if you will, that Pietism is getting its word out there. Right? It's through the Great Awakening. And people are beginning to have a different understanding of the institution that is religion. Okay? Does that help? That's a good question. Now, the impact in the South is probably even more dramatic. It's certainly more important. In the South, the Anglican Church had been what most people had called their religious affiliation. Okay? That begins to change, especially with the Baptists. I'm not going to get into Baptist doctrine. What I do want you to understand about the Baptists, though, they invited slaves into their churches to worship with them. Right? So this is problematic. You understand what's going on here. You've got poor white people worshiping right next to poor black people. That could be problematic if you just so happen to be one of these rich, ruling class plantation owners. Okay? But what was even more problematic about the Baptists is that they were practicing what they called the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule? Yes, do unto others as you have done to you. So you've got white people and black people in the same room saying, do unto others as you'd have them do to you. And that might be problematic in Charleston, South Carolina, because exactly, it's a profound challenge to the institution of slavery. So what did they do to the Baptists in the South? Crazies, and forbid it. They drove them underground. They said, to be a Baptist is to be illegal, and it will not be tolerated. And as we can clearly see this here in Texas, right? We can see it because if you drive around Dallas, drive around Fort Worth, drive around anywhere in Texas, you've got to drive a long, long way to find a Baptist church, don't you? They're nowhere to be found, are they? Why are you looking at me funny? You're looking at me funny. What? Because they're all over the place, right? I mean, baptism just sweeps across the South like wildfire, right? Exactly. I mean, there's Dallas Baptist University, for goodness sakes. So obviously, they're not doing a very good job. So what that means is, if you can't beat the Baptists, you need to join the Baptists. And to join the Baptists means that you need to control them, right? Teach the slaves certain parts of the Bible, such as
Respect to those that are higher upon you.
Yeah.
Because they could have...
Respect God's will. If you're a slave, it's because God wants you to be a slave. The meek will inherit the earth, right? But don't teach them that Moses eventually got the Jews out of the desert. That might be problematic. And it's very problematic later on in the 19th century when a guy from Virginia named Nat Turner had his own impressions on what God meant by, being a slave. Okay? I'm hopeful that this makes sense. I'm hopeful that when you get that midterm question, especially the essay, you'll be able to see that the development of American political thought isn't coming randomly or indiscriminately. There's a lot of factors. The Enlightenment is huge, and so too is Pietism, this religious movement that's sweeping across both the North and the South. Okay? Have a fantastic weekend, everybody. Don't forget to participate in the discussion forum.